Alright, check it out. I got a camera now. It took forever to find an app that was free, didn't have any limits on like how often you can record, and also was like somewhat user friendly. But I found one. Go me. It has to be free though, because if it's not, then I have to input a card, and then you'll be able to see the charge on the card, and then my cover will be blown. So that's why it took me forever to find a like visual recording app. But it's fine. I got one. And I didn't want to talk about the topic today until I had a like visual recording device, because I have a couple in my own collection that I'd like to use. So, if you haven't noticed, today's episode is on the history of trench mortars. Now, trench mortars, in a sense, have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. But what is a trench mortar? And that question is kind of hard to answer, because there isn't really like a decided answer as to what a trench mortar actually is. Like if you look on 100 different websites, you're gonna get 100 different answers. But what it kind of boils down to, like what is a trench mortar, is going to be a short range, small mortar that basically fires at a high angle, like an extremely high arcing angle. Now, with that definition, it still narrows it down, but you can still get trench mortars in a sense from a couple hundred years ago. So we're going to say that the history of trench mortars, in the sense that we know them as, is going to be mortars that have been used to kind of break the gridlock of trench warfare and are adapted because of that. Now, this image you see on the left here is, by that definition, the earliest trench mortar. But again, there really isn't a good definition of what a trench mortar actually is. You have the one on the left here, which is a extremely early model from 1904 during the Russo-Japanese War. Well, the Russo-Japanese War was a very early indicator of what the First World War would end up looking like extremely scarily accurate. Well, with this mortar, you cannot adjust the angle that the mortar fires at. You cannot adjust the angle up or down or to the side. You can't adjust it at all. The only way you can adjust how this sucker fires is by adding more or less dirt to the front of it and rotating the entire thing. Not super sophisticated, but regardless, it was still pretty effective for what it needed to do. Now, this image on the screen here shows a battle drawing of this being used in combat, and you can see that they are extremely close to the enemy sitting in a fortified position. Now, trench mortars are very good at doing two things. One of them is taking out infantry accurately, and the other one is taking out things that are in your way. Very good at cutting down obstacles, and that's what this mortar was designed to do. Well, it was pretty accurate, and there were a couple German observers at this battle that saw how accurate it was, and they decided that Germany has to have their own variant of this trench mortar, so they went and they made their own. Now, we'll get to what they made in a second, but now we're going to look at why would you want a trench mortar? Like, why would you want a trench mortar over just a standard massive artillery piece? Like, why would you have some dinky little explosive device when you can have a massive 120 millimeter shell come in and absolutely decimate an enemy position? But also, like, there's 100 other things that you could use instead of a trench mortar, but a trench mortar has a place in warfare, and it did the job that it was designed to do really well. Well, now that I have this camera, we can see this very, very good drawing, and I can explain to you why with video. So imagine that you are in this trench here, okay? And you really want to take out the guy in this trench. Well, you call in your artillery that is 2 miles away, and an hour after you call it in, the first shell comes in. Like that. Except this angle is pretty shallow, because this guy can only fire let's say 2.5 miles. But because it's 2 miles away, the angle of which that it comes in is shallow because it doesn't have the explosive power needed to come in at a higher angle. But let's say that this guy misses and his round falls short. Well, now you have to get somebody from this trench to run the 2 miles back to this guy and tell him that he needs to adjust his fire to aim 100 meters further. But now that's going to take another hour before a shell gets corrected to shoot. It's not fast and it's not accurate and it's also shallow, which means that the odds of a shell making it into this trench are extremely small. Well, if you have a trench mortar, and even though it may be kind of small and doesn't have the same explosive power that this guy is going to have, it is a lot more accurate, and also you can give immediate corrections on your firing angle to give faster fire, more accurate fire, and overall more damaging fire. So if you're in this trench and you have a trench mortar and you're sitting 100 meters away from the enemy and you fire off that trench mortar, it is going to go up and it is going to come down at a very sharp angle, which means that the odds of it actually making it into this trench, causing shrapnel to go down the trench line, is higher. But also, let's say you miss this trench on your first shot, you are close enough that you can see that and immediately adjust fire instead of having somebody run backwards to this artillery piece. There's a time and a place. So that is why you would want to use one of these and why they were so effective at that job. Now, if you had a ton of artillery pieces back here and you just wanted nothing to exist down here, you could fire these and get a better effect than this trench mortar could, because you're doing more damage over a wider area with these guys, but it's not as accurate and it takes more time. But if you just want to take out barbed wire or just screw with the enemy over here really quickly, you're going to want this guy instead. Now, the Germans see this and they decide that they really want their own trench mortar. So they put their minds together and they decide that, okay, we're going to make our own, and it's going to be a smaller version of an artillery piece that we can adjust fire, and then we can put it closer to the front. Now, you saw the Russo-Japanese War, and you see that there's trenches. But you do not expect what is about to happen in the First World War. Nobody expects what's about to happen in the First World War. So they make this trench mortar right here. And I say trench mortar, but is it really a trench mortar yet? Because there's no trenches. Who knows? Is it just a small mobile artillery piece? I don't know. So this is the Minenwerfer 17 centimeter for when you want to werf your Minens. Now, this is a very early development, but they are extremely effective at the start of the First World War. They are supposed to be used against the French fortresses on the German border, but when the trenches get made and the enemies get bogged down, you can roll this guy up in your trenches, and we just went over this. It's a lot more effective because it comes down at that higher arcing angle. Well, this Minenwerfer comes out and it's pretty well. So Britain and France realize that they need their own mortars, except R&D is going to take a while. So you have Britain and France scrambling to make mortars, and Germany realizes that they have pretty good mortars, so they are going to make more trench mortars, but they are going to make it in different sizes. Pretty soon afterwards, you start to see like light, medium, and heavy trench mortars, each of these being based off of the size of the artillery piece that is being fired. If you have a light trench mortar, it is going to be small. It'll be able to be carried by 1 or 2 people, and you can put it extremely close to the front line, if not on the front line. If you have a medium trench mortar, depending on the theater that you are in, it would be a little bit more retreated. It would be in the 3rd line or the 4th line, because you wouldn't have enough space to directly put it on the front line, and you wouldn't want to call in like fire on your position on the front line. That's been super well made, and we'll go over that in a different episode as well. But you would have these heavy trench mortars that are pretty large. Well, these can't really get up to the front lines, because when you're in, this massive trench warfare and there's nothing except just open plains for miles on end, trying to get one of those massive trench mortars into the front lines is extremely difficult. So there's a time and a place for every single type of mortar, and we'll go over that in a minute as well. So back to Britain and France. You have France, which dusts off these Napoleonic era mortars. Well, the British named these Toby mortars because of the guy that said we should put them back out there. This image here is one of those Toby mortars. Very tiny little dinky mortars. You can see a shell resting on the side here, and then a shell inside of the mortar. The mortar isn't big enough to hold the entire shell. It's not extremely accurate. It's not extremely good. It's really just a stopgap until France can make their own mortar to combat the German mortar that's been put out. Well, the British, by 1915, have made their own mortar that's like legitimate. It's an actual mortar. It's not some Napoleonic era weird thing. It's an actual mortar. And they come out with this 2-inch medium mortar. What you can see, this like weird bulb here on the end of it. Super, super weird mortars, but they were really effective for the time. They were used all the way through World War I, and they had a bunch of different sizes. They kind of look like fireworks, honestly. And they did well. They did fine for what they needed to do, but they also are making a different type of mortar. So they come out with the 3-inch Stokes mortar. Well, the Stokes mortar is revolutionary for the time. Like, it's legitimately revolutionary because of the way that it gets fired. The German mortar and the early Napoleonic era mortar are these like massive artillery pieces that have wheels, and it takes like a horse to draw them up to the front. It's crazy. It's insane. But this guy Stokes makes this long tube with a base plate under it and 2 arms to hold up the shell. And then you would place down the mortar shell and you would drop it down the tube. Instead of like loading it like a traditional artillery piece, you would just hold it in the tube, let it go. It would go down the tube, strike a firing pin, which would ignite the fuse at the bottom of the shell and send it out of the tube to its target. And it was revolutionary because now you can have 2 people carry a couple of shells and the mortar wherever they need to and immediately give direct fire support to what they need to fire at. It's insane. It's amazing and it's revolutionary. And you can see a mortar that is identical to that today. Because most personal like infantry mortars are just like that. They all have the same exact setup. The United States Army uses mortars that look identical to this. They're just a little bit bigger now. Now, the guy that you see on the screen here is Stokes with his mortar, and he has a bunch of different shells that you can use. There's different types of, mortars that accommodate different shells, but it's revolutionary. It's insane, and the guy really did something here. And the Stokes mortar is so good that it's used for the rest of World War I and also in World War II. And one of those shells looks like this guy right here. This is a 3-inch Stokes mortar that has been cut away so you can see the inside of it. This is what you would see on the, if you are looking on the left side and then you count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going right. This is number 2 or number 5. And it was really effective because it was just simple. You could mass produce these. You could get them to the front. It was amazing. Now, you would hold it in the tube with this part inside of it. And then you would drop it. You would let it go. And this would slide down the tube. It would strike the firing pin at the bottom. And then you would have a fuse at the bottom that would explode, propelling this out of the tube, sending it on its way. And then it would strike and it would explode. Really, really effective. This is what would be considered a medium-sized trench mortar. And it worked really well. So that's what the British decided to come up with for the First World War. And they had a bunch of other different mortars, but nothing as cool as a 3-inch Stokes mortar. Now, the French in 1915 also come out with their own types of trench mortars. Because keep in mind, 1915, the war has really swelled up. It's a huge, legitimate world war now. So everybody's economies are set to war economies. Everybody's research and development are just on making new items to kill people with. It's insane. So they can make something crazy in the span of a year. So the French, due to accidentally mass producing tens of thousands of artillery shells that cannot be used for the artillery pieces that they were made for, decide to turn around and make a really weird type of trench mortar. And saying trench mortar is a kind of a weird inaccurate description. I mean, it is. It definitely is. But at the same time, it looks nothing like the rest. But I don't know. So this is the mortar 75mm 1915, firing a 75mm shell, just like what their standard artillery pieces would. And somehow they would get this into the trenches, and they would fire it. And they were somewhat effective. I couldn't find a whole lot on it, but effective enough until they got new trench mortars. Now keep in mind, nobody really knows what a trench mortar or a small infantry mortar is supposed to look like yet. So everybody's making these crazy ideas trying to figure out, like, what's a mortar supposed to look like? How does this work? So you get some crazy things going on. Well, the French, also in 1915, come out with a 58mm mortar that they use for the rest of the war. These little towed mortars, like the one you see on screen here, have these fins to keep it very, stable while in flight. But unlike the Stokes mortar, you still load it into the barrel, and then you adjust it, and then you fire it once everything is set up. You don't just drop it and let it go. Well, these are two Americans firing this mortar in late 1918. And it just shows how effective they were. They looked really weird, but they were really effective. And part of that was due to how large the mortar was. Now, different mortars have different jobs. If you have a light mortar, you are going mainly to take out infantry. If you have a medium-sized mortar, you are going for infantry and maybe to take out barbed wire. And if you have a heavy mortar, you're really going for anything that you can hit. Well, you have this guy, the French 58mm little towed, and this is considered medium still. You have the 3-inch Stokes, which is a medium, and this is a medium. It's more so based off of the size of the launcher that decides if it is a light, medium, or heavy. So because this guy fits in a medium launcher, this is a medium trench mortar. I don't know. Well, this guy's a little bit different from the one in the photograph. This guy has a cutaway. This would be where you put all of the shrapnel, all of the gunpowder, anything you would want to put in here is what you would. This is where the fuse would be. This one does not have the fuse, sadly, but it is really fascinating to see what's inside of it. And then back here is where the fins would be. This one doesn't have the fins either, but it's really fascinating to see just how long the tail end of the mortar is. And then in here is where the propellant charge would be to get it off of the launcher. Well, this guy would be extremely effective at taking out barbed wire and wood and collapsing trenches and going after infantry. Well, if you have your little Stokes mortar, you can take out barbed wire pretty easily. If you have that 58mm mortar, you can take out barbed wire very easily. Well, one of the main issues seen in the First World War was that these artillery bombardments preceding the main attacks would not take out the barbed wire. There are several accounts of soldiers marching up to the enemy trenches and seeing the barbed wire completely untouched. These trench mortars were a way to combat that. These trench mortars would come down and they would take out the barbed wire. So that was one of their main jobs, was to just take out any obstacles in the way of the infantry. Now, also in 1915, you see some other mortars being made that have different uses. Now, the two mortars that I've shown from my collection and all the other images have done their jobs well. But there are some times where you don't want the loud noise of the mortar being fired to attract the enemy to your position. Sometimes you don't want the enemy to see the puff of smoke come up from your position. Whatever the reason is, you just don't want the enemy to come back to you where you're firing. So in some theaters, such as the Italian and Austro-Hungarian front and the German/Russian/Austro-Hungarian front, you don't have the same level of trenches that you have on the British/French/German front. When you are sitting in a trench and you have been there for 2.5 years, the enemy knows where you are. You haven't moved. Your address hasn't changed. But when you are fighting against Italy or fighting against the Russians, where there are not as many trenches, having a mortar that does not attract attention to you because you are constantly on the move matters a lot. So in the back part of 1915, you have the Germans come out with this 10.5 centimeter Luftminenwerfer M15. This is a pneumatic mortar. You can see here there's this like weird dial on the front. That's the pressure buildup using only compressed air to fire it. And this would only let out a small little like as it goes out the barrel, and it would leave no smoke. Now, the mortars were smaller than most of the mortars that you would see, but the entire part of why they were made was to be secret, to keep your position hidden, and they did that extremely well. There are also Austro-Hungarian pneumatic mortars that get made that are also highly effective. And it's really fascinating to see that like within 2 years of the war outbreak, you have just crazy amounts of mortars being made, all of them filling different roles and all of them being legitimately truly effective. Now, I say 2 years, but we've only covered 1 year. And I say 2 years because there's one more mortar that I would like to talk about. You've seen heavy mortars, you've seen medium mortars. Now, the one mortar you haven't seen yet are light mortars. Now, this image on the screen here is a Granitwerfer 16. Now, all the different numbers at the end of these mortars denotes like the year that these mortars were made. This one being made in 1916. Well, this is what would be considered a light mortar. The entire thing, all of the shells and all the base plates and everything, would weigh around 100 pounds, which is extremely light. That is one person carrying it or two people carrying it pretty easily. Now, these would be considered light mortars because, one, the size of the launcher is incredibly small. Like you can see in this photograph here, the guy's forearm is longer than the base of the mortar. And also, the shell that is being fired is extremely small as well. This would be used almost exclusively for anti-infantry purposes. This would not take out many barbed wire placements or any crazy trench collapses because you took out the wood that's blocking the trenches. It really wouldn't do that. It was really mainly just used against infantry. But these were incredibly effective. For one thing, it was small, portable, and you could get it anywhere you wanted, and they mass-produced these. But two, you can see these ribs on the mortars. That is a new invention on these trench mortars that has devastating effects to the person that is receiving this. Now, I should preface this with saying that this was an explosive device. So, if you are going to bring one through an airport, make sure you have the correct paperwork that shows that it is inert, because this was a bomb at one point, and it looks like this. Now, the ribbing on this mortar was built in shrapnel. It's 2 times the shrapnel per shrapnel. These were purpose built to be weaker on the inside of the ribs and then stronger on these raised parts. So when this explodes, you have these thick metal pieces literally blowing off in every single direction. So no matter where this guy lands in the trench, you will get a supposedly even spread of shrapnel in every single direction. All of the other mortars, when they explode, they will send out varying sizes of shrapnel in different directions, but this guy was a lot more effective for taking out infantry. Also, this guy weighs like 2-3 pounds. It's light. You can get a lot of these to the front extremely quickly. And the fins on the back here would help it be extremely stabilized in flight. Also, this fuse right here is also extremely sensitive. So when it hit the ground, it would explode extremely well. This is like leagues and leagues better than what you would see in 1914 and 1915. I mean, this is like the premier trench mortar. And it's just really fascinating to look at just how quickly they advanced in the span of 2 years from like Napoleonic era mortars to purpose-built ridges to get more shrapnel per shrapnel. And more stabilized firing, and they're smaller and they're more compact and you can produce more of them. Trench mortars in the First World War are just fascinating stuff because they are just so like widely used. Like if you look at a photo of a trench and it's like a second or third line trench, there's a good chance you'll see a trench mortar. If you look at, different accounts of shelling during the First World War, there's a good chance that what they're talking about could be a trench mortar. And it's just really fascinating to see that R&D of a small item that played such a crucial part of that massive war. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you were okay with seeing me in the episode. So hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a good one.